We all once had the dream of shooting the final shot. We were all student athletes, or maybe we know a student athlete who dreamt the big dream. Recently, a landmark ruling affects college sports and opens the door for universities and colleges to start to significantly pay their student athletes, potentially changing how we think about the dream. DJ and I talk about the road of the student athlete to the pros and beyond on this episode of Mama We Made It with DJ and Reg. Please join us. My brother, good morning. What's happening?
Good morning, brother. How are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
I'm doing well. Good to see you this past weekend.
Likewise. We had a good time. It was a good hang. It was
really good.
I came into this excited about this conversation, but I have a question for you because I think I know the answer. Or maybe it's just the esteem in which I hold you. I'm just curious to see what the answer to this question is. Did you ever get a patch for the Presidential Council of Physical Fitness?
Absolutely did. Still proud of it.
How? Just one? Did you get more than one? Every year?
I made sure I got one every year. Yeah, I made sure I got one every year. Shuttle runs, all that kind of stuff, man. Yeah, erasers in your hand and, right? Skid marks on your elbows.
Running the mile, doing pull-ups.
Yeah, did you?
Hell no. No.
Okay.
Let's just say that I was not an athlete. I was a student. My last attempt at competitive sport, I grew up playing baseball. Baseball was my sport, and I was halfway decent at it.
Heck of a sport.
But by the time I got to high school, I wanted to hoop with my boys. The last time I tried to make a team with a cut was ninth grade basketball. And let's say it didn't go well. Let's just say it didn't go well. And I became the party dude after that. So no, but I always admired those cats who would dress out for gym and be ready to go for the physical fitness test. And I was intimidated by it. Like climbing the rope wasn't my thing. Doing pull-ups wasn't my thing. I didn't have that kind of speed, and it wasn't no fun for me whatsoever. But I did like the ceremony, and the patch was kind of fly.
It was fly. It was, a badge of honor. It was very competitive for me. And, not just this against the other kids, but how did I do last year? How did I do, right? So, but I remember that, man, and you asked that question. Those were moments that I actually cherished as a kid. I enjoyed going home, showing my mom, look, mom, no hands. My mom made it. Those kinds of things.
Which is appropriate for what we're talking about today, for sure.
Yeah.
You still have them?
No, I wouldn't even know. I do remember the last time I saw them. It was, again, way too many moves as a kid.
Yep.
But I remember the last time I saw them. I don't have them anymore. Not to say my mom might not, but I'll have to check in with her.
Yeah. Let's pull that out of the archive if you can.
Let's do that.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning to Mama We Made It with DJ and Reg. That's DJ. I'm Reg. Today's conversation kind of picks up off of the notion of youth sports and physical fitness. We both spent a good amount of time, and DJ is still very much in the space of education and sports and youth sports in particular. And we wanted to talk today about kind of the journey from student athlete to professional athlete to professional endeavors outside of the field of play. And we want to kind of look at what that conversation looks like. So let's kind of dig into it. Purse, this is really your domain. So I yield the floor to how you want to frame this conversation.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. So there's a personal side to this for me, Reg, and then there's also sort of a landmark agreement, aka settlement that was made that you and I have talked a little bit about. I'll start with that settlement. And I say landmark because it feels like for the first time there's acknowledgement with at least the Power 5 conferences in the NCAA that student athletes should be fairly compensated for their presence and performance at a university. Not just in terms of an agreement around tuition, et cetera, but they're actually performing and at times the face of the team. and this extends beyond NIL. There's a revenue share component. So quickly what happened, and then, would love to get your perspective too. California's Northern District made a decision that NCAA and Power Five could settle with at least a dozen players. There were three cases pending, antitrust cases. The other option was NCAA, Power Five pay about $10 billion. And they saw that coming and said, we might want to be innovative and head this off at the pass. So in a nutshell, person, would love to get your perspective now. One of the aspects of this is each school is permitted, not required, permitted to share revenue. And it feels like that's going to be about 22% of ticket sales, TV dollars, and sponsorships. So sort of some new elements entering into the revenue share opportunity. So on the face of that, what comes to mind for you? Do you feel like that's a good move for student athletes, which is really, to me, at the center of this conversation?
I don't trust the NCAA, so we'll just start there, right? Like,
Yep.
I don't expect them to ever do anything that's going to be fully equitable for the student athlete, and I do believe that being able to get into the larger pool of funds as it relates to all of these broadcast rights and the big dollars that go with that. If there's going to be a revenue share component of that money, and not just like NIL money is nice money. It's not the real money in my estimation. The real money is the broadcast revenue and
Yep.
all the ancillary services or revenue that come with that. So if this is a move towards that for the student athlete to participate, I'm excited for them, and I love to see that progress because, to my mind, while they may not necessarily be employees in that way, what they do is beyond the normal course of duty to be just a student in college. So I recognize that. So this seems like a good step forward. That said, man, from where I sit as a dude who was in the stands, right? Like I was never that level of athlete. I start with, and my background just professionally just ended up being in this space, whether I was working in confections, whether I was working at the YMCA, EA Sports, Nike, like a lot of my space was youth sports. And for me, it starts with the funnel that is youth sports participation rates, right? So as we got ready for this conversation, I wanted to look at that, right? And, if you start to look at just overall youth sports participation rates, right? Looking at people who are playing organized sports at least once a week, the numbers are slightly in decline, right? We are somewhere around 53% of American youth from 6 to 17 playing a sport, and it goes up a little bit in adolescence, which is somewhat counterintuitive because you also lose a lot at kind of the beginning of high school. But it's fascinating to watch one thing happen that I did not realize, and that is there has been a precipitous decline in youth sports participation amongst black kids. 10 years ago, there was roughly 43% of black kids, 6 to 17, were participating in sports at least once a week. It's coming down to about 35% now, and it's the lowest among the major ethnic groups, and it is corresponding with a decline in low income
Absolutely.
sport participation. You can talk about all the reasons why, but the stereotype is that black kids over-index in sports, and certainly they do at the highest level of performance, right? Now we can see what's on our TV screen. We know who's playing in the major leagues of the two sports, particularly that drive American consciousness in terms of basketball and football. But I was caught off guard by what that means. So when we think about the elite sports participation, it looks a certain way. But the reality is fewer and fewer of our kids are playing. More and more of our kids are choosing, ideally, the arts. That'd be great. But some of it is just more sedentary lifestyles, more electronic sport, esports, video gaming, not moving as much. And that's a concern for me. So as we unpack all of this, I don't want to leave behind the conversation that says the funnel seems to be producing fewer overall student athletes for our kids in particular. So that's fascinating to me.
And it's interesting because I think you started this by saying, you may or may not consider yourself an athlete, but your knowledge of sport is impressive. I'll probably put you in the top 10% just in terms of from a historical perspective, and then the ability to kind of see through some of the clutter around decisions like this. So I think you come with a really, really informed perspective here. To put it into context, like you just talked about, the way I look at this is sort of like a pyramid. Got about 8 million student athletes at the high school level. And you talked about where those numbers are moving. About 550,000 NCAA student athletes, right, between genders. Roughly the size of Sacramento. So when we start talking about these deals and these settlements, that funnel or that pyramid really starts to tighten. And then when we talk about professional athletes, it's probably about 5,500 professional athletes in the U.S. If we look at major sports leagues, NFL, MLB, soccer's in there, WNBA is in there. Mm-hmm. Then, Percy, you start to think about the lifespan, the career span. And it's somewhere around 3.3 to 6.5 years in any of those sports. So it's a narrow pyramid that starts to really, really tighten at the top. So I think one of the things to think about, I was fortunate enough, I did have the opportunity to play football and run track with a scholarship. It was a D2 scholarship, but I also had a partial academic scholarship to Michigan State, and I opted for that. I did go through a self-identity crisis. I never considered myself not considering playing some professional sport.
Sure.
But I'm fortunate enough to kind of be able to fall back on, I hate to put it that way, but that's how I looked at it, on academics.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because when we think about that, it gets into a conversation that you and I have often around careers in sport. So, Purse, Nike has about almost close to 80,000 employees now. Adidas, 62,000. Yeah. Dick's Sporting Goods, 51,000. So when we think about the need for student athletes at a young age to start to develop competencies related to sport that allow them to pursue opportunities adjacent to those playing the sport, I think that's where the opportunity lies, right?
Yeah.
So as you think about that and you think about your journey into Nike, do you have thoughts on where student athletes are today? Is their focus right? Is it too much around the sport itself and the performance and not enough around some of these other opportunities?
I will lead with my dad lens, right? I will say that we all know that sports has tremendous benefits, right? There is a learning that happens of sense of self as you deal with, particularly in a team sport, how to follow, then lead, how to manage stress and perform at your highest level when it's called upon, how to deal with loss and heartbreak and all those things, the physical activity. There's a tremendous amount of benefits. You'll never hear me say a bad thing about kids playing sports. I do also recognize that, man, to be good at it takes a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And there's an opportunity cost to those hours of practice to be good at it that could be in the lab, in the debate club, in art, at a museum touring. And so for me, it's always about the balance and the emphasis of student athlete, not athlete student. So I'm always looking at it from that perspective. The spaces that I was fortunate enough to work in and a lot of people that I've been mentored by and people that I've been able to mentor, a lot of athletes, a lot of cats who played, softball, baseball, football, like all the sports. And so it is impressive to see how many of those student athletes took their approach to the game and applied it to their approach to life, right?
Absolutely right.
The ones that are grinding are impressive folk who have figured out that early to bed, early to rise, all that type of stuff. Like, their method of doing what they do, their early morningness. Like, I watch Wifey, and, my wife, for those who don't know, is up at 4:30 every morning of every day on the planet. And that comes from her kind of sports training background. So I watch the behaviors of athletes transition to these spaces. And I tell kids all the time, tell young folks all the time that those habits you've built can be reapplied in these spaces, and their intuitive understanding of the competitive landscape of sports serves them well when they think about strategies of connecting with consumers around sports and sports entertainment. So I think to go from 100 kids playing youth sports to 2 make it to the league, that's a fool's errand. Most of us ain't gonna be pros, but what you learn all the way through from little league baseball to high school to if you make it to college is valuable. And so it's fascinating to watch those cats perform. And there used to be a time, man, you remember, you would see these professional athletes be on TV struggling with the basics of the language and putting things together. That's not what you see anymore, man. These young brothers and sisters are poised and polished and multifaceted and building their brand. So I love that trend line. I do still recognize that the academic framing that prepares them for life after sports still hit or miss.
Yeah, not to go too far into detail, but I think you've also been able to experience this journey from being a parent of a student athlete at a university or college right now, right?
Yep.
And I think you have another son who I think also could have played.
My other son, yes.
Right. Right.
My firstborn was a beast of a soccer player,
Absolutely.
but life went left for him. He has become a phenomenal cyclist now, and he's ripped up, which is a whole different story. But yes, both serious athletes, and big brother begets little brother's talent. So for sure, there's a relationship there.
Yeah. And there's this other component I want to get your perspective on too around gender. You and I were at the Swoosh for a minute, and we saw an inordinate amount of student athletes come into the company as brand new employees.
Yep.
What I often found, Perce, was, and again, I haven't put hard numbers to it, but at times those student athletes who were women at times outperformed. And I wonder if they knew in their heads there was a really minimal professional opportunity for them. So they had to use that student athlete college experience a little differently, potentially.
Sure.
Than the male athlete. Again, again, this is not I haven't done any stats on this, et cetera, but it felt like at times knowing this might be my last stop on my academic front meant something when it came to the workplace.
I observed the same thing. I'm looking at some of the data right now, participation rates by age. Children ages 6 to 12 rates have generally been higher, but is declining. But girls 6 to 12 and girls 13 to 17 is growing, right? So boys participate at a higher level than girls on average, 71 to 63%, normalizing for the data. But the growth in young women participation rates is growing, and it's a good sign for a lot of things. And it's dovetailing, right, with matriculation rates, right? So we're seeing more women come out of college, more women starting to get advanced degrees. And so those two things or three things are related. And my observation is the same thing, right? The women who were athletes in the corporate space definitely on balance were strong performers by and large. And I think over time you will see more and more of these organizations, they will break through. It's still an old boys club, and that's always going to be the challenge. But the numbers are the numbers, man. And increasingly you're seeing women who are student athletes become women who are on an executive path, particularly in the sports industries. And it's fascinating to watch. And I wonder how much of that is, to your point, not only did I not think about going pro, but the slow but steady increase in coverage of women's sports, right?
Absolutely.
Slowly but surely, there are more images on screen. There are more images behind the microphone. And it is, why we can't wait, right? Apply to women's sports as well. But increasingly, you see and feel their presence without even talking about the Caitlyn effect and what that's going to mean down the road.
100%. We were talking a little bit just again from a personal experience standpoint. That decision, I grew up in a really pretty small town, and that decision to never lace up, never put a pad on again, even at 17 years old, man, was life altering. So I can imagine going through a college experience as a student athlete. You can be a great student athlete, and having to make that decision, like, even if it's minor league baseball, even if it's overseas hoops, whatever it might be, you potentially will opt for that versus starting a job at a brand where now I'm part of an also ran scenario and I have to reframe all of this. So it gets tricky. Like, it gets really, really tricky. I was fortunate enough to take everything that we're talking about. And when I pursued this more scholarly journey outside of corporate America, this really was the impetus for a master's program that I was able to co-develop with a university. And bringing this sort of mindset into the curriculum itself. So as a master's student, it's focused on, the degree was in sports leadership. The premise was, we're developing leaders, not just managers, and not just folks who understand business, but there's a critical leadership component. And you can leverage your student athlete experience around leadership to become a leader in corporate America. But it takes curriculum, it takes frameworking, and it takes an understanding of critical concepts. And that's what that master's degree was focused on. So probably one of the proudest moments of my life, man, was being able to take all of this and apply it to an academic setting and not just kind of ride out as, that Nike dude.
Yeah.
Which in and of itself, it's not a problem, but knowing that we can leverage this into other spaces. So I've enjoyed that part of the journey as well.
Yeah, and kudos to you, man. And again, that will bear
Thank
fruit,
you.
right? Because everybody's not going to end up on the dream path of professional sports, and quite frankly, not everybody's going to matriculate. Like, not everybody's going to even get to the level of a master's degree program. And so I do think the discussion of curriculum in a continuing education space, a lot of online learning platforms as well. Like, I'm intrigued by all the ways we try to wrap our arms around the universe of these student athletes, right? Because a lot of people on the team, right? A lot of
Yes.
people participating who
Yes.
are getting the benefits of being there. And, we eschew the participation trophy, but the reality is there is something to just being on the team, being in the room, being a part of the conversation that there is a value to. At the same time, man, the thing that's also funky about this is I saw a stat that said something like 1 in 5 of college athletes, 20%, give or take, are black students.
Sounds
But
about right.
less than 10%, particularly at PWIs, right? Less than 10% of the non-student athlete student body is black.
Yeah.
And so they are
Yeah.
in the sports bubble surrounded by their peers and folk that look like them. But in the stands, they're looking at a whole bunch of faces that don't look like them. And that's a weird dynamic, man, because this whole conversation around the ownership privilege mentality of the audience, the fan, that's my team, those are my players, it gets a little fucking. So I do want to make
Yes.
sure that we are mindful of the broader ecosystem these student athletes live in. And, what happens to the civilian, the student athlete who just goes to college as a student had to lay the spikes down, so to speak. And now they're in these lands of I'm no longer in the spotlight and I'm on this, campus, lost in the sauce. And a lot of it is challenging to deal with, right? There's a lot of talk around you that is uncomfortable and you ain't even involved in it.
It is. And to your point, the tricky part is also just the performative nature of that, right? You're in the fishbowl, you're performing. When you are no longer the center of that attention and you transition to being a civilian, as you put it, are you equipped? Can you handle that? It's a whole different scenario. But, all in all, man, I'm hoping, to your point, it's hard to trust just historically. I go back to, the O'Bannon brothers fighting around before we were talking NIL, right?
Sure.
And the landmark antitrust scenarios around gaming there. But the fight has been a decade.
That one too.
Yeah.
Shout out EA Sports in that one too.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. But it goes back, man. And so I'm hoping this is a positive step in the student athlete journey because, again, I put them at the center of all of this. And if it's not serving them, because universities are going to take care of universities. So I think it's a brave move, but as we know, man, it's still a long way to go.
It's a litigious move, right? Like they got lawsuited into this, and so they're still being kicked and they're still being dragged, kicking and screaming. I wonder, right, with the current administration and their leanings towards power over people, whether or not there will be some finessing conversations here, because yes, the antitrust threat is always there, and that's through the House and Senate, but the White House plays a whole different game, man, and I gotta believe a lot of those cats running the NCAA rock with old buddy, and so I will be curious to see how this gets put into practice, because again, you're talking about money coming to folk that look like us in significant numbers, and that always ends up with some strange knock-on effects.
And Reg, again, in closing, are we in the room? Who's representing us in the room? Who's representing those student athletes in the room? You talk about the 1 of 5, right? An inordinate impact on oftentimes black student athletes, men and women. And not being in the room and only being the recipient of all this activity kind of takes you out of the conversation. And it feels good because it's better than it was before. But we know that pie is extremely large. So you're going to see, like you said, LLCs form, et cetera. I think Deloitte's involved in that whole thing. NIL Go is what I believe they're calling it. Is that a rightly guided institution? TBD.
A question for you, though. Should students be organized and creating unions, collective bargaining entities?
And that's sort of what I'm intimating is I could see the day coming, and it's hard for me to say that's a conversation we should avoid. I think we should be having that conversation. I truly do. Because otherwise, again, you're not sitting in those rooms.
More to come. This is Mama We Made It with DJ and Reg. This conversation is one of those conversations for us that ladders up to liberation, right? This is about understanding the landscape. We all know a young student athlete who is doing their thing and he or she is, walking this path of, I got a dream. But what happens when the dream doesn't work out? There's plenty of ways to parlay and turn what you learned into a career path of leadership, success, and independence. So keep pushing, keep rocking. Dr. DJ, man, I love it when you get into your professorial bag. More of this, more of this, more of this. This is Mama We Made It. That's DJ. I'm Reg. Like us, subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us all the stars you possibly can. Send us comments. Let us know what you think. Peace and blessings, everybody.
See you soon.